I never thought a simple Christmas decoration could make me the enemy of an entire neighborhood. But the day I opened that letter from the HOA, the one with the bold black letters and their favorite phrase, violation notice, something inside me changed. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments after you hear the whole story. It started quietly, the way most wars do. The air was crisp that morning, a gentle December chill running through the trees. I had just finished setting up the last string of lights on my porch when I heard the rustle of footsteps behind me. My neighbor Karen, yes, her name was actually Karen, stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, clipboard in hand like a courtroom judge. "You know the rules, right, Tom?" she said. "Only one lawn decoration per household." I remember wiping my hands on my jeans, trying to stay polite. She always came at you with that syrupy tone, sweet on the surface but sharp enough to draw blood. I told her I understood. I told her I'd already read the new HOA notice they'd mailed out last week, but what I didn't tell her was that I had no intention of letting them control my joy. Not this year. You see, last Christmas was my first one without my wife, Laura. She passed away that spring after a quiet 3-year battle with cancer. For the past 15 years, our home had been her canvas. Every December, she would turn our front yard into something out of a Hallmark movie, glowing reindeer, singing snowmen, and a small inflatable Santa that danced when the wind hit just right. The kids on the street loved it. Even the mailman used to stop and take pictures. So when the HOA decided to pass a new rule limiting each house to one single decoration, it wasn't just about the aesthetics. It felt like they were erasing her. I tried to reason with myself. It's just a rule. Tom, you can follow it for 1 year. But that night, as I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the boxes of decorations she had labeled in her perfect handwriting, porch lights, Santa, wreath, I couldn't do it. I could almost hear her voice teasing me. "If they say one decoration," she'd say, "then let's make it count." That's when the idea started forming, a mix of grief, defiance, and love. If the HOA wanted one decoration, then they'd get one. Just a little bigger than they expected. The next morning, I opened my garage, dragged out my old woodworking tools, and started sketching. My neighbors probably thought I was building a shed. The sound of saws and hammers echoed for days. And Karen came by twice to check on my progress. I could see her curiosity bubbling beneath her carefully pressed pink sweater. By the 5th day, I had the frame built, 12 feet of solid pine and steel, rising above the fence line like a monument. I painted it bright red and added golden trim. At the top, I mounted a large glowing star that shimmered when the wind moved through the branches nearby. It wasn't just decoration. It was a tribute. A promise to Laura that I wouldn't let anyone shrink her joy into something small and rule-bound. The night I finished it, I plugged in the lights and stepped back. The yard glowed like sunrise. You could see it from the entrance of the cul-de-sac. Kids riding by on their bikes stopped and stared, mouths open. Even old Mr. Benson from across the street whistled and said, "Now that's a Christmas tree." For the first time in months, I smiled. But the next morning, I found another envelope on my doorstep. Notice of violation, it read. Exceeds height limit, causes visual obstruction, and violates Article 4,
Section 2, Decoration Restrictions. Signed, of course,
by Karen herself. That was the moment the real fight began. I could have taken it down. I could have apologized, paid the fine, moved on. But something about the way they worded that notice, cold, impersonal, like I was some troublemaker instead of a grieving husband trying to hold on to a memory, it pushed me over the edge. I decided that if they wanted to make an example out of me, then I'd make sure the entire town saw what they were doing. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would change everything. Not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. Because when you challenge an HOA, you don't just challenge a rule, you challenge the people hiding behind it. By the end of the week, the 12-foot monument in my front yard had become the neighborhood's favorite topic, depending on who you asked. To some, it was a tribute to holiday spirit, something warm and defiant in a sea of beige conformity. To others, mostly the HOA board, it was an act of war. I knew the notice wasn't the end of it. HOA letters never came alone. They came in waves. So when I saw 3 people walking up my driveway one Saturday morning, I already knew what kind of conversation was coming. Karen led the charge, of course. Behind her was Steve, the HOA president. and another board member named Donna, the self-proclaimed rules enforcer. They had clipboards, cameras, and that smug expression that said they were about to save the community from chaos. I stayed calm. I leaned against the porch railing, coffee in hand, pretending the cold didn't bite through my sweater. Steve started with his usual preamble about maintaining standards and ensuring property value. His tone was flat, rehearsed, the kind of voice you'd use reading out a parking fine. Donna stood beside him, jotting notes like a courtroom stenographer. And Karen, well, she was enjoying every second of it. "Mr. Walters," she said, tilting her head in that condescending way she'd perfected. "We all appreciate your enthusiasm, but your decoration is causing quite a distraction." I looked past her at the small group of neighbors gathering at the end of the street. Parents with strollers, teenagers with phones out, filming. The scene looked absurd. 3 board members trying to take down one grieving man's Christmas display. I told them I understood their concern, but the rule clearly said 1 decoration. And I only had 1. Steve didn't like that answer. His lips tightened. "The size, Tom, is unreasonable. It violates the height restriction. It's a safety issue," I wanted to laugh. A safety issue? A 12-foot structure made of reinforced pine wasn't exactly going to topple over in the wind, but I didn't argue. I just asked them to show me the exact clause. I knew that would slow them down. Donna fumbled through her paperwork, and for a moment the air was quiet, except for the faint buzz of my lights and the sound of children giggling across the street. That silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. Then Karen, clearly frustrated, said, "We're going to have to issue a fine." That was the moment my patience cracked. Not from anger, but from something deeper. Exhaustion. Exhaustion from always having to justify joy to people who didn't understand it. I told them they could fine me, they could write me up, but I wouldn't take it down. It was staying until Christmas ended. That night, I found another letter taped to my door. Final warning. Remove decoration within 48 hours. 2 days. That's all they gave me. I went to bed angry, but when I woke up the next morning, something unexpected happened. There was a knock at the door, and when I opened it, I saw my neighbor Sam from 2 houses down. He was holding a cup of coffee and smiling. "Hey man," he said.
Just wanted to say, that thing looks amazing.
"My kids love it. HOAs lost their minds." Then came Mrs. Green from across the street, who quietly slipped an envelope into my mailbox. Inside was a handwritten note. "Don't let them win. Your wife would be proud." By noon, I realized something. People were paying attention. Not just watching from the sidelines, but quietly taking sides. The next night, when I stepped outside, I noticed something that made me stop cold. 2 more houses had put up decorations. Then 3. Then 5. At first, it was small things. A reindeer here, a snowman there. But by the following day, the entire street had transformed. My neighbors were making their own statements. Not because I told them to, but because something about standing up, even over something as simple as decorations, had reminded them of what community was supposed to mean. It wasn't about the lights. It was about belonging. Of course, Karen didn't see it that way. By the 3rd day, the HOA sent another letter. This time, not just to me, but to everyone in the subdivision. It was an emergency board meeting notice. To address recent violations and restore order, they were calling it a decorative rebellion. That phrase made me laugh. I sat at my kitchen table, looking out the window at the glow of lights reflecting on the snow, and thought about how absurd it was, a neighborhood at war over joy. But I also knew the meeting wouldn't be just words. Foes never stopped at warnings. That Sunday, I walked into the community center to face the board, and what I found there changed everything. The small room was packed. Neighbors filled every chair, lining the walls. Some whispered, others glared. Karen sat in the front row beside Steve, both with their thick folders of evidence. But what they didn't expect was the number of people standing behind me. Dozens. People I barely spoke to, now standing shoulder to shoulder with quiet defiance. It was strange, this sense of unity born from resistance. Steve started the meeting in his usual measured tone, reading rules and citing bylaws. But every time he mentioned my violation, someone in the crowd would whisper or shake their head. Then halfway through, he said something that lit the fuse. We can't allow individuals to prioritize personal sentiment over community standards, he said. That's when I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. I told them my wife used to make this neighborhood feel alive during the holidays. I told them this wasn't about rebellion. It was about keeping a promise. And for a long moment after I spoke, no one said a word. Karen's face softened, just slightly, but she didn't back down. The rules exist for a reason, she said. Maybe so. But sometimes I thought, so does love. That night, as I left the meeting, the crowd outside started clapping. It wasn't loud, just a ripple of support, quiet but powerful. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. But when I came home, there was a car parked across the street. A white sedan. Inside, a man in a suit with a clipboard watched my house. The HOA wasn't finished. They were escalating, and I was about to find out how far they were willing to go. The next morning, the white sedan was still there. Parked in the same spot, engine off, windows slightly fogged from the cold. Whoever sat inside wasn't hiding. They wanted me to see them. I could feel the weight of their stare as I poured my coffee and stood by the kitchen window. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe an insurance agent or a visiting relative. But by noon, when the car was joined by a second one, both with tinted windows and identical clipboards on the dashboards, I knew this wasn't coincidence. The HOA had hired private inspectors. They called them property compliance auditors, but everyone knew what that meant. Professional tattlers, paid to dig up violations. I walked outside to check my mailbox, and one of them stepped out of the car. He wore a corporate-looking jacket with a badge that read, Community Management Partners. His voice was flat and formal. Mr. Walters, we're here on behalf of the HOA to document ongoing infractions. Please refrain from interfering. I wanted to laugh. Interfere? It was my house. But instead, I just nodded and watched as they started taking photos. The display, my yard, even the mailbox. It felt invasive, like they were peeling layers off my life for evidence. By sunset, I found the notice taped to my front door. You are hereby fined $200 per day for noncompliance with HOA decoration policy. Continued violation will result in legal action. Legal action. That night, I sat in the dim light of the living room staring at that letter. The Christmas lights from outside flickered through the curtains, scattering color across the walls, a strange mix of warmth and dread. I thought about my wife. About how she used to sit right there, wrapping gifts with that quiet hum she always had when she was focused. I wondered what she'd think of all this, of me fighting a homeowners association over a decoration. Would she laugh? Would she tell me to let it go? But deep down, I knew she'd tell me to stand my ground. The next day, I called the HOA office. The manager, a woman named Beverly, answered with that plastic sweetness that people in power use when they think you're beneath them. I explained the situation calmly, that I had followed the written rule, that there was nothing in the bylaws about decoration size, only number. She sighed, as if she'd had this argument 1,000 times before. Mr. Walters, she said, you're disrupting community harmony. We've had complaints. Your neighbors feel pressured to compete. That made me laugh out loud. Compete? For what? Joy? She didn't appreciate the humor. Within a week, the fines stacked up. $200 a day became $1,400, then $3,000. Then came a notice saying the HOA intended to place a lien on my property if the balance wasn't paid. That was the breaking point. I wasn't just dealing with overzealous rule enforcers anymore. This was personal. They wanted to humiliate me, to make an example out of me. But they underestimated how stubborn a man could become when he's already lost everything that truly mattered. I decided to fight. I spent 3 nights digging through the HOA bylaws. Dozens of pages filled with legal jargon, but somewhere between lawn maintenance and exterior uniformity, I found what I was looking for, a clause about non-quantitative decorations. It stated that any decorative installation not posing a physical or safety hazard could not be fined or forcibly removed unless proven to cause material damage. In plain English, my display didn't break any rules. I called my attorney, an old friend from my military days. When I explained the situation, he actually laughed. They picked the wrong veteran to mess with, he said. We drafted a cease and desist letter. demanding that the HOA immediately withdraw the fines or face counteraction for harassment and defamation. 2 days later, I saw Steve and Karen walking the street again, but this time they weren't so smug. They were reading from a letter, my letter. Their faces were tight, red with anger. The next HOA board meeting was chaos. Neighbors came out in record numbers. Some supported the board, but most were tired of the rules, the intimidation, the endless nitpicking over trash cans, fences, and now holiday decorations. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the front of the room, holding the folder of letters and fines they'd sent me. My voice was calm but sharp. I served this country for 30 years, I said. I've followed every rule I ever signed my name under. But this, I lifted the paper. This isn't order. This is control. The room was silent, except for the sound of someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. Then Karen tried to interrupt, waving her hand like a student desperate to be seen. We're just doing our job. I looked her dead in the eye. No, you're doing your job, not ours. Something changed in the room after that. You could feel it. The tide shifting. By the end of the meeting, a motion had been filed to suspend enforcement actions until legal review. It wasn't victory yet, but it was a start. That night I went home and turned on every single light on that 12-foot decoration. The neighborhood glowed, warm, alive, untamed. Cars slowed as they passed. Kids clapped from back seats. Somewhere I thought I heard laughter, but as I stood there, the faint sound of Christmas music in the distance. A car pulled up slowly to the curb. It was Karen's. She rolled down the window just enough for me to see her face. No clipboard this time, no smirk. Just a cold, tired look. This isn't over, she said quietly. Then she drove away. I didn't know it yet, but she was right, because the HOA had one last card to play, and it was about to turn the fight from personal to public. The first sign that things were about to get uglier came 2 weeks later, on a cold Thursday morning. I opened my front door to grab the paper and found something taped across my garage, a bright orange poster board with thick black letters, disrespectful to community values. Below it, someone had added in smaller handwriting, some patriot you are. I stood there, coffee in hand, staring at it. It wasn't an official notice, and it was personal. Someone in the neighborhood had decided to take the HOA's fight into their own hands. Within hours, my inbox was full. Neighbors sending photos, texts, screenshots. Someone had posted about me in the neighborhood Facebook group, a long, twisting post full of half-truths, calling me aggressive, uncooperative, and divisive. It even said I had verbally threatened an HOA representative, which, of course, never happened. The post had hundreds of comments, some defending me, most attacking me, people I'd waved to for years, people who'd borrowed tools, shared cookouts, now calling me that guy with the flag complex. That's how the HOA wins. I realized not through law, but through shame. That evening, I took a walk through the neighborhood just to clear my head. But it didn't help. Curtains twitched as I passed. A few people turned away when I nodded. A couple whispered loud enough to make sure I heard. I didn't fight for my country just to come home and be treated like a criminal over a holiday display. By the weekend, things escalated. I received an official court summons. The HOA had filed a civil action claiming I was intentionally lowering property values by erecting non-conforming structures. Words made it sound like I'd built a factory, not a Christmas decoration. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. I spent those 3 weeks gathering everything. Photos, emails, the HOA bylaws, the attorney's letter. I wanted to walk into that courtroom ready for war, but I wasn't the only one preparing. The HOA had hired a lawyer, the kind who wears smugness like a second skin. He gave interviews to local news outlets, calling the situation a matter of community standards. Before long, a news van showed up outside my house. Mr. Walters, care to comment? The reporter asked, microphone extended. I looked at her, then at the camera, and said calmly, all I did was put up one decoration. They turned it into a fight. That says more about them than it does about me. The clip aired that night. It spread faster than I expected. Suddenly, my phone was ringing nonstop. Reporters, veterans, strangers from other states thanking me for standing up. What the HOA didn't realize was that they had just lit the fuse on their own downfall. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Cameras in the back, neighbors in the rows. On one side, the HOA board members, suits too stiff for comfort. On the other, me and my attorney, sitting quietly with our stack of documents. Karen was there too, sitting front row, arms crossed, face tight with bitterness. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The HOA's lawyer went first, talking about decorative proportionality, aesthetic cohesion, and communal equity. Big words meant to sound reasonable. But the judge didn't look impressed. Then it was my turn. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't need one. I stood, took a breath, and spoke plainly. Your Honor, I served this country for 30 years. I've lived in this neighborhood for 10. I've followed every rule, paid every fee. The HOA says I can only have one decoration. I have one. The only problem is that they think it's too big. I paused, then held up the bylaw page, my finger tapping the line that mattered. No limitation shall be placed on the size of a decorative installation unless it creates a safety hazard. I looked up. There's no safety hazard, just bruised egos. The courtroom broke into soft murmurs. The judge leaned forward. When he finally spoke, his words hit like thunder. The court finds no violation of HOA policy. All fines and penalties are to be revoked. Case dismissed. Karen's face went pale. The lawyer's smirk cracked. But it didn't end there. As the crowd left, I caught snippets of conversation, neighbors whispering, "He's right. They've gone too far. I'm tired of being afraid of them." By the end of the week, half the neighborhood had signed a petition to recall the current HOA board. Karen resigned before the vote even took place. I thought it was over. But sometimes victory feels heavier than defeat. The night after the verdict, I stood outside looking at my display, glowing strong against the dark. Kids stopped by to take pictures. Someone even left a card on my porch. No name, just a message. Thanks for standing up for all of us. But then I noticed something strange. On the curb across the street under the street lamp was a small pile of shredded paper. I walked over and realized it was pieces of my court documents, torn up and scattered. Someone had taken them from my mailbox, and right there in the middle of the mess was a pink Post-it note. 2 words written in shaky handwriting. You won't win. I looked around, but the street was empty. The night was still. It wasn't the HOA anymore. It was personal. The war wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The morning after finding that pink note, I stood at my kitchen window with a cup of black coffee, staring at the street like it might give me an answer. Everything was perfectly still. Too still. No joggers, no kids waiting for the bus, no Karen walking her dog like clockwork at 8 a.m. The whole neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. It had been 3 days since the court ruling, and though I had won, something about the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like retreat, the kind that comes before another attack. When I stepped outside, I noticed subtle things. The motion light above my garage flickered even though no one was there. My mailbox latch was loose. My recycling bin had been moved a few feet from where I'd left it. It wasn't vandalism, it was a message. We're still watching. That same afternoon, my neighbor Linda, one of the few who'd stood up to the HOA before, came by with a file folder. "You didn't get this from me," she said, glancing around nervously before handing it over. "But you need to see it." Inside were photocopies of old HOA board meeting minutes. Most were dry and dull, budget approvals, landscaping discussions, but one section from 4 years ago caught my eye. It mentioned a property incident, Walter's family. My last name, my pulse picked up. I wasn't even living here 4 years ago. I read further, and the words chilled me. A prior Walters residence was involved in a flag display violation resulting in property damage. Board member Karen L. expressed concerns about recurrence with same family line. I froze. Family line? There was only one person that could mean. My brother, Thomas. Thomas had lived 2 towns over before he passed away. He'd always been stubborn, proud, the kind of man who didn't take well to authority. I hadn't known much about his neighborhood issues, just that he'd been fighting with his HOA before his heart attack. I grabbed my phone, opened the local news archives, and searched. Within minutes, there it was, an old article. Veterans Memorial Display causes HOA dispute. The photo showed my brother's front yard. The same flagpole. The same kind of setup. The same red, white, and blue floodlight that now glowed in mine, and standing in the background of that photo in sunglasses and a pink blazer was Karen. It hit me like a punch. This wasn't random. This was personal. She'd known exactly who I was when she demanded I take down my flag. This was never about HOA rules. It was revenge. I spent the next few hours digging deeper, tracing public records, property filings, even HOA membership rosters. The more I looked, the clearer it became. Karen had transferred from my brother's old neighborhood's HOA to this one the same year I moved in. That night, as the wind rustled through the oaks, I couldn't shake the image of her face in that old photo, the same smirk she wore when she handed me the violation notice. But there was something else I hadn't noticed before. In the photo, right behind my brother's display, the house number was visible, 2147. His house had burned down 6 months later due to what investigators called electrical failure. No one ever questioned it further. Now I started to wonder, was it really an accident? The next morning, I decided to test something. I turned on my doorbell camera and walked out to my mailbox. Inside was another pink note folded neatly. Take it down or you'll regret it, but this time, there was a fingerprint, faint, but visible. I took it to a friend I still knew from my time in the service, someone who worked security for the county sheriff's office. He lifted the print and called me the next day. Whoever that is, he said, she's in the HOA registry. Name's Karen Lowell. My blood ran cold. That night, I installed new security lights, multiple cameras, and set up a hidden one facing the street. I stayed up late, watching the footage live on my phone, waiting for something, anything, to move. At exactly 2:47 a.m., a figure appeared. A woman in a pink robe walking up my driveway with a flashlight. She crouched near my mailbox, slid something inside, then turned toward my house. For 1 second, she looked straight into the camera, her eyes wide and cold, like she knew I was watching. The next morning, I opened the mailbox to find a single photo, my brother standing by his flagpole, smiling. Written across it in red marker, like brother, the gloves were off. This wasn't an HOA dispute anymore. This was a war that started years ago, one I hadn't even known I was drafted into. I wasn't just defending my flag now. I was defending my family's name. That night, as the flag waved gently in the cool wind, I promised myself one thing. I would find out what Karen did to my brother. And when I did, everyone in that perfect little neighborhood would finally know who she really was. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside my window made me tense. The creak of a branch, the whine of a distant car, the faint buzz of the security cameras clicking in the dark. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. Angry that someone like Karen could hide behind HOA titles, rules, and polite smiles while carrying a secret that might have destroyed my brother's life. By morning, I had already called in a few favors. When you've served long enough, you learn that loyalty runs deep among those who've worn the uniform. My friend Mason, now an investigator with a private security firm, agreed to dig into Karen's background, quietly. If she's got skeletons, he said, I'll find the bones. While waiting for Mason's report, I went through every file, every email, every HOA memo I'd ever received. I noticed a pattern. Karen's name was on every violation notice I'd ever gotten, even for things unrelated to the flag. A crack in my driveway. Grass length. Trash bin placement. She'd been targeting me from the day I moved in. But why? That question followed me all day until the next morning when Mason called. His tone was different, low, cautious. You need to see this in person, he said. Meet me at the diner by Route 14. Bring the photo she left you. When I arrived, Mason already had a laptop open. He turned it toward me. On the screen was an old insurance report, the fire that had destroyed my brother's house. You see this line here? He said, pointing at the witness statement section. One person reported seeing someone near the property right before the fire. Guess who? Karen Lowell, I whispered. He nodded. She lived just 2 streets over at the time. Claimed she was walking her dog. But get this, the same night, she filed a complaint with the HOA about your brother's unauthorized display of lights. It all connected like a chain snapping tight. My brother's flag, the complaints, the fire, and now her moving into my neighborhood to finish what she started. Why would she do this? I asked. Mason leaned back, sighing. Her husband was a local councilman back then. He ran a community fund for HOA developments. Your brother exposed him for embezzlement. The story got buried after your brother's death, but she never forgot. She's been trying to erase every trace of that humiliation. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The image of my brother smiling beside that flag came rushing back. And now I understood why she looked at me the way she did the day she saw mine. To her, I wasn't just another resident. I was a ghost from her past. That night, I decided I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I gathered every file, every note, and printed the photo she left in my mailbox. Then I set up a camera in my living room and began recording my story, not as an HOA member, but as a brother seeking truth. I showed the threats, the harassment, the connection between her and my brother. I blurred her face for legal reasons, but the message was clear. When you try to silence a veteran, you silence the very people who fought for your right to complain. I posted it anonymously in a local neighborhood forum, the kind everyone in town reads. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Comments poured in. I knew she was dirty. She did the same thing to my cousin. The board needs to be dissolved. By morning, my street was buzzing with quiet rebellion. Neighbors who'd avoided me before now waved. Someone even tied a small flag to their mailbox. Another placed one on their porch, and then came the knock. Karen stood at my door, shaking, wearing her usual pink suit. But this time, her confidence was gone. You think this will end well for you? She hissed. You've made a mistake. I stayed calm, my phone recording discreetly in my hand. No, I said. My mistake was thinking I could live peacefully while you kept destroying people's lives. Her jaw tightened. You have no proof. I handed her the photo of my brother, the one she'd left for me. I think you gave me all the proof I need. She turned pale. Without another word, she stormed off toward her car. The sound of her heels on my driveway echoed long after she was gone. Later that week, the HOA board announced an emergency meeting. Rumors spread that Karen had been asked to step down due to allegations of misconduct. When I arrived at the clubhouse, the atmosphere was electric. Neighbors filled every chair, whispering, glaring at her as she sat in front of the panel. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Mason had sent the report anonymously to every board member. By the end of the meeting, Karen was gone, escorted out in silence. But the real victory wasn't about removing her. It was about reclaiming something my brother never got to: justice. That night, I walked outside, the cool air brushing against my face. My flag waved proudly under the soft glow of the floodlight. For the first time, it didn't feel like defiance. It felt like closure. Still, as I stood there, I couldn't help but wonder, people like Karen don't just disappear quietly. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. The wind shifted, and I turned toward the dark street where her house once stood, empty now. Or so I thought, until I saw a flicker of light inside, a single lamp in the window. Someone was still there. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, maybe from a passing car or a street lamp catching the glass at the right angle. But when I looked again, the glow in Karen's old window didn't fade. It flickered, like the uneven pulse of a candle flame. The house had been vacant for weeks, padlocked by the HOA while they reviewed her conduct. No one was supposed to be inside. I stood there on my porch, arms crossed, the cool air brushing across my skin, watching that faint, stubborn light. It wasn't curiosity that pushed me, and when it was instinct. The same kind that had kept me alive overseas. Something wasn't right. I grabbed my flashlight and my jacket, my boots crunching softly against the gravel as I crossed the quiet street. Every window on the block was dark, except for that one, second floor, left side, the same room where she'd once stood glaring at me while I raised my flag. When I reached her front gate, I hesitated. The for sale sign creaked in the wind, the chain on the fence rattling slightly. I pushed the latch, unlocked. Typical. The HOA's version of secured was always more about paperwork than safety. Inside, the air was stale. It smelled of dust, cleaning solution, and faintly something else, like burnt paper. My flashlight beam swept across empty rooms and bare walls. The furniture was gone, but in the corners, Faint imprints of her things remained, where a table had once stood, or a rug had kept the carpet a shade lighter. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning under my weight. The light came from a room at the end of the hall, her office. The door was slightly open. I could see the faint glow of a laptop screen through the crack. Someone was inside. My hand hovered near the handle, muscles tensed, ready for anything. I pushed it open, and there, sitting in the half-dark, was a man I'd never seen before. He was in his 50s, graying hair, wearing a maintenance uniform with no name tag. He didn't flinch when I stepped in, just looked up, eyes tired as if expecting me. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly. He sighed, turning the laptop toward me. On the screen was a spreadsheet, columns of names, addresses, and large sums of money. HOA members, payments, and at the bottom a name I recognized, Karen Lowell. "I worked for her," he said finally. "Maintenance, records, small things. She told me to delete these files before the board came, but I couldn't." I stepped closer, my pulse quickening. "What is this?" He pointed to one of the columns labeled Property Adjustments. "Fake fines," he explained. "She used the HOA to funnel money through property liens. Every violation went through her husband's old company. People lost homes without ever realizing it. It hit me like a punch to the chest. This wasn't about one flag or one neighbor's vendetta. It was about power, the kind that hides behind rules, signatures, and clipped smiles at HOA meetings." The man rubbed his eyes. "I didn't know what she'd done to your brother until I saw the name on the file. He was one of the first." I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. And now, she was trying to erase everything before it reached court. But when you posted that video, it stirred things up. Someone higher up wants it buried again. He stood and handed me a small flash drive. "This has the backups, everything. But if you're going to expose them, do it soon. They'll come for it." I took the drive, slipping it into my pocket. "What about you?" He gave a small, resigned smile. "You didn't see me." Then he walked past me, down the stairs, and out into the night. I stood there in the empty room for a long time, staring at the glow of the still open laptop. The quiet hum of the machine filled the space like a heartbeat. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. When I finally stepped back out into the street, the neighborhood was silent again. My flag across the road swayed gently in the wind, a reminder of everything this had started. I didn't know who they were yet, but I knew one thing. Karen hadn't been working alone. The HOA was just the surface. The real corruption ran deeper, hidden behind boardrooms and legal jargon, and now I had the key. That night, I backed up the drive, storing copies in 2 different places. Then I emailed a local journalist, someone I trusted from my service days, now working investigations for a major paper. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to get her attention. By morning, my email inbox was full. Reporters, lawyers, neighbors, all wanting details. But what caught my eye was a single message from an unknown address. "You've made a powerful mistake. Take down the video, or lose more than your flag." The sender's name was hidden, but the attachment was a photo, taken from my driveway just hours ago. My front door, my flag, my house, and in the reflection of the glass, a pink sleeve. The photo haunted me all night. I didn't sleep. I just sat by the window, lights off, watching the street. Every gust of wind made the flag ripple like it was alive, whispering in the silence. I could feel the weight of the flash drive in my pocket like a heartbeat. Whoever sent that message knew exactly how to get inside my head. They wanted me scared. They wanted me to back down, but fear is a language I learned to speak fluently and control. I'd faced men with guns, men who thought intimidation was power. What they never understood was that power isn't about who shouts loudest. It's about who's willing to stand when the shouting stops. By sunrise, I'd made my decision. I was going to expose them. All of them. I met with the journalist Rachel at a small diner 2 towns over. The morning crowd buzzed with the sound of coffee cups and conversations about weather and politics, blissfully unaware that somewhere in those laptop files was a web of corruption worth millions. Rachel was sharp, mid-30s, the kind of woman who didn't waste words. She'd covered military scandals before, and when I slid the flash drive across the table, her eyes narrowed like a sniper finding focus. I explained everything. The fake fines, the property seizures, the intimidation tactics, and how it all traced back to the HOA's development fund. She listened silently, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, she said only one thing. "This is bigger than you think." By the time we parted ways, she'd already called in favors: forensic accountants, data experts, even a federal contact. I drove home with the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. I knew they'd retaliate, but I didn't expect how fast. That afternoon, a black SUV rolled slowly down my street. No Lagos, tinted windows. It didn't stop and just passed by twice, then parked near the corner. I saw the glint of a camera lens through the windshield. They weren't even trying to hide it. I stepped outside, hands steady, and raised my phone to record. The SUV drove off instantly, tires whispering against the asphalt. But that was fine. I didn't need a confrontation, not yet. I needed proof they were watching. That night, I uploaded a video. Not to accuse, not to rage, just to show. I told the story from the beginning: the flag, the HOA's demands, the confrontation, and what I'd uncovered. I kept my tone calm, matter of fact. Viewers could hear the truth in the quiet. By morning, it had over 2 million views. The comments poured in: veterans, homeowners, neighbors across the country sharing their own HOA horror stories. The phrase, "they demanded I remove my flag," became a rallying cry. And beneath the noise, something started shifting. Local media picked it up, then national outlets. By day 3, HOA board members were resigning. Lawyers were calling press conferences, but with exposure came risk. 2 nights later, my front porch light went out. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, and there it was again. The faint outline of someone standing near the edge of my lawn. Female, short hair, pink sleeve catching the light. My pulse quickened. "Karen," I said under my breath. She didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there for a moment, then turned and walked toward the corner, vanishing into the shadows. I could have followed, but I didn't. That moment wasn't about her anymore. It was about everything she represented. The next morning, I got a call from Rachel. "We published," she said simply. The story hit like a shockwave. Federal investigators launched a probe. Multiple HOAs in 3 states were found funneling money through shell companies, all linked to the same network Karen had worked under. The headlines read, "National HOA Corruption Ring Exposed. Millions in illegal property seizures uncovered." My phone buzzed nonstop for days. Journalists, activists, even politicians reaching out. But the message that meant the most came from a man I'd never met. He wrote, "I lost my home to them too. You gave me hope. That's when I realized this wasn't just my fight. It was thousands of people's fight. All those who'd been silenced, fined, bullied, and broken by systems built to protect the powerful." A month later, the neighborhood changed. The flag rule was gone. So were the cameras, the threats, the unmarked SUVs. I replaced the old flagpole with a taller one, 12 feet high, not out of defiance, but out of remembrance. On the day I raised it, people came out of their houses to watch. Some clapped quietly, some just smiled. Even the new HOA president, a decent man, retired firefighter, stood beside me and saluted. As the wind caught the flag, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, just peace. The kind that comes when you've told the truth and finally been heard. Later that evening, I walked past Karen's old house. It was still empty, but in the window I saw my reflection, calm, older, unbroken, and for the first time I didn't feel anger anymore, just understanding. Some people build fences to feel safe. Others build them to keep power. But no matter how high they go, the truth always finds a way through. Would you have done what I did? Would you have fought back, even when it meant risking everything? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the smallest act of defiance, a flag, a light, a truth, can burn brighter than any fire they try to start.